What's up, y'all? It's Murk back here with some more Draft League content, and today I'm finally going to be bringing you my third installation of Draft League Hot Seat. And now this time we're not going to be talking about any particular mon, we are going to be discussing the electric type as a whole in the Draft League format. Now, electric is one of the more interesting types in the format, in my opinion. It's often debated whether it's a necessary type on teams. Some people will say that a fast electric type is something that you have to have on every team, while some people, including myself, often disagree, and some believe that it's a completely superfluous typing. There's some very interesting things, there's some very good things, and also some subpar things about the typing as a whole, and it definitely is a very interesting part of the format. I often find myself drafting an electric type, but I will explain what kinds I take and their purpose on teams. So the notable things about electric types is they often have a strong offense. Electric types usually have a very strong special attack stat, and moves like Thunderbolt, Volt Switch, Discharge, Thunder on a rain team potentially all have a very strong offensive potency. And you also have moves like Thunder Wave, which pretty much every single electric type gets, which is a good defensive annoyance to teams. Really important things that electric types can do is offer a flying resist, and they also typically have very few weaknesses. A pure electric type is only weak to ground, so things coming off of that typing will be weak to ground, plus whatever the added types they're weak to are. And the downsides to it, electric types, as you mainly know, is that they're pretty much hard countered by ground types since they're immune to electric moves, and then they're getting hit super effectively by ground moves in return. Some of the most often coverage seen on electric types is going to be hidden powers such as grass and ice to be able to hit the ground types and ground water types and those kind of Pokemon that can take on electric hit, so it's quite often to see them with that hidden power if they don't already hold the coverage. And the biggest importance to electric types, really, in the eyes of many, is Volt Switch, because Volt Switch is a fantastic utility for offensive teams, mainly if you can have things like hazards on the field and you can force your opponent to switch out and also be able to get damage while getting switch initiative. It's really, really good to get chip damage and to be able to keep the offensive advantage in your favor. So that's why electric types are really good. However, I do often find that electric types are unnecessary, and it really depends on what kind of electric type you're getting. Now, I've divided the types of electrics into 6 different categories, and they're the best: Revengers, Pivots, Cheat Picks, Miscellaneous, and the God Stunfisk. So there's really 6 different types of electric types, and the first one is the best. Now, the best is the 4 kings of the electric type in draft here, and that's Tapu Koko, Zapdos, Thundurus Therian, and Thundurus Incarnate. Now, these 4 mons are undoubtedly the best, and the reason that is because they're extremely versatile, they're all very strong, they're very capable Z-move users, they have really strong offensive capability as well as decent defensive capability. They have very wide move pools and a lot of tricks that they can pick from, and overall they just have very good stats to support being able to do many things. Out of the 4, I believe that Tapu Koko is the best, but the Thundiforms and Zapdos all have very good values. Tapu Koko, I believe, is the best because it has the best speed out of the 4, while having solid bulk, good offenses, the ability to be a mixer, having U-turn and Volt Switch, which all 4 of these have, which is very important to maintain momentum. This thing gets Nature's Madness and Taunt, which are 2 amazing utilities to be able to beat down more defensive teams, which mons like Zapdos can't do as well. It has Roost, so it can maintain health, and it has the best mixed offensive investment out of any of them, and the addition of electric terrain really helps it out to hit hard, while also preventing things from the opponent's side from going off, such as rest, so that you're not bothered by random rest talk mons is just kind of a little added bonus, but the offensive power that's added from electric terrain really helps this mon out. Zapdos is a really good one. I think it's probably the 3rd best out of the 4. If I was to rank them, it would be Tapu Koko, Thundurus Incarnate, Zapdos, and then Thundi T. Those last 3 all in very close contention for any of those slots. Zapdos is the best mix of offensive and defensive potential. It has cool things like Defog, Baton Pass, It has a good special move pool. Electric and Heat Wave is basically all it needs most games, along with a hidden power to hit things very hard. It's hard to take down, and if you invest offensively, then it's very hard to switch into as well. And the two best offensive mons out of the group are the Thundy forms. Thundy T is the most raw powerhouse out of the bunch, sporting that base 145 special attack stat, where it's most often seen as the best nasty plot and agility user, and it's typically seen as the best Z-move user out of the bunch because it has such a high special attack stat to where it can absolutely nuke things with things like an Electrium Z, Thunderbolt, or any kind of Z-move from its very wide move pool. And Thundy is a very, very good mon as well. It has more even offensive stat distribution of 115 attack and 125 special attack. It has two very good abilities, whereas the other Pokemon, aside from Zapdos, only have one. Zapdos has static and pressure. Both are very good defensive abilities, whereas Thundurus has two very good offensive abilities in Prankster and Defiant. Defiant lets you punish Defog and Intimidators, letting you take care of that physical stat that you have. And with the advent of Z-moves, you are able to actually use Flying Stab on the Thundy forms now, with the ability to use a Z-Fly to fire off a very powerful supersonic Sky Strike. Overall, this thing has a lot of potential, and all four of these electric types are very, very good. They're Pokemon you very often see, if not always see, going in the first two rounds of a draft, and they're electric types that can do something that none of the other electric types in the entire game can accomplish, and that's why they're so good. That's why they're the best. The next I'm going to go into is the Revengers. Now this, I believe, is the most overrated group of electric types. These are the Pokemon that are fast and that click Volt Switch, and that's about it. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a terrible thing to have. Having a fast Volt Switcher is really nice. However, Pokemon like Mega Manectric, Jolteon, Raikou, Heliolisk, and you can go on from that list. Those pretty fast electric types, their main goal on a team when you pick them up is, I want this thing to click Volt Switch. And the only time I really think picking up these kind of mons for that specific purpose is appropriate is when you're in a free draft, because if you're in a points draft, I would never spend points on things like a Raikou or a Jolteon or even a Mega Manectric, just because of the fact that they do the same job that a cheap electric can do for much more value, for just getting a little more damage. But the point of Volt Switch is not to get a ton of damage off, it's to get some chip damage off and get into a mon that better deals with the Pokemon in front of you. So overall, I don't believe that this group is the very best. I think it's actually one of the worst groups of electric types in the League format. So I'm definitely against the idea that you always have to have a fast electric type, and I'll delve more into what I think the best ways to go around having electric type are later on once I go over all these. The next one is definitely one of the more interesting categories, and that is pivots. Now pivots are Pokemon like the Rotom forms, Electros, even Mega Ampharos, Lantern. These mons take advantage of the bulky aspect of being an electric type, having very few weaknesses. These Pokemon can come in, take a hit, get a slow Volt Switch out, and keep up your momentum while also dealing off some damage since they're all relatively strong. They're good defensive mons. They're very often, the best is when they're paired up with things like Wish Pass, and they're good for bulky offensive teams so that you can come in and sponge a hit and get slow momentum out so that you can bring in one of your big hitters. Overall, this tier is very, very interesting. These Pokemon have a lot of versatility, much more than the Revenging, because these Pokemon can either be defensive or offensive, which the Revengers lack. And overall, these Pokemon are really fun to use. They have a lot of cool treats that you can use with them. Rotoms especially have a lot they can do, especially since they have so many different typings that you can pick a Rotom as a pivot and tailor it to exactly what your team needs. Obviously, Rotom Wash is the best, and I'd say Rotom Mow is the second best after that, followed by Heat Form, and then Fan and Fridge not really being that good. Of course, that normal Rotom is still very nice. Electros is definitely one of the more annoying Pokemon that I've ever had to face, just because it's a mon that has no weaknesses, meaning that it's very hard to kill. You essentially have to hit it with a really strong neutral stab to be able to take it out, and even then it can still live. It has a lot of annoying things it can do. It can get rid of your item with knockoff, it can U-turn or volt switch, it can go for super fang, it has things like drain punch to recover health, it has some gimmicky setup options with coil, and the list goes on and on. This thing is a very interesting mod. Mega Ampharos, it's not that good, but it still accomplishes the same deal of being able to take hits and firing off very powerful volt switches, that is. The only problems with Ampharos is that it's ridiculously slow and it doesn't have recovery, and it also takes up your mega slot. So unless you really don't care about having a mega or all the good megas are taken, I probably wouldn't take Mega Ampharos, but it definitely is an interesting mon to try out. And Ampharos is definitely the best bargain out of all of these. It has a very good defensive typing, it has 2 great defensive abilities, so it can either be immune to water or electric, which are both very nice. And it's a mon, once again, that is very hard to kill. It uses berries well, and it's a Pokemon you don't often see, but it definitely has a lot of uses. It has a lot of niches that it can do. Its offensive capabilities are very similar to Rotom Wash, since its dual stab of water electric is very strong, and it has good coverage to boot, so it's pretty hard to switch into if you offensively invest in it. So moving on, we will go into the cheap picks. Now this, I believe, is a very interesting group. This is essentially the group that you would pick in a price draft if all of the other things you need are done, you don't need anything else, you're at the end of your draft, and you just want a little speed and something that can click Volt Switch. That's all these kind of Pokemon are really good for. Things like Manectric, Electrode, Zebstrika, Electabuzz, etc. There's a lot of these very cheap and relatively fast electric types. They're all really weak, they all have pretty bad coverage, but they click Volt Switch, and that's about all you want them for. So they're definitely best in a price draft. I definitely think that if your team is in need of an electric type, if you have a little bit of a Volt Turn core going, and you are still lacking electric type, this is definitely an avenue to go down. They're most effective in a price draft. Like I said, I probably would never take these in an open draft just because there will always be better mons available. And overall, these do a job. They won't come to very many games unless you're just really infatuated with them or your entire league decided not to draft ground types. But they're Pokemon you can use, and there's some things that will help you out when you need them, especially against electric weak teams, and they're a good thing to just add a little bit of speed to the end of your draft. Next is definitely the most interesting, and that's basically just the miscellaneous bin. Mons like the Magneton, Magnezone, Electivire, Vikavolt, Pokemon that really don't do things that are synonymous with an electric type. You've got your Trappers, you've got Electivire, which is a physical electric type, which is pretty rare. It's a good wall breaker. Vikavolt, a very slow offensive one that has more potential as a breaker than as a pivot, unlike the other ones, because it's weak to rocks. These Pokemon are very interesting. The only reason you pick these up is if you're trying to have a little more fun, you're trying to be a little heat with it, or you're patching up a very specific weakness. Say if you're very weak to steel types, that's when you'd pick up a magnet form, just so that you can threaten those and trap them, maybe force them to run a shed shell, so that they can't do as much as they want against you. Overall, this tier is not really that good. Often you won't be picking one of these. If you just decide to get around for Magnezone, I would not recommend it. Pokemon like this aren't very good unless they have a very specific role on your team, something that you need to get done. Like if you're really in need of a late physical breaker, you can go for Electivire. If you're in need for a slow, powerful mon, such as Vikavolt, then that's definitely something you could go for. And also the fact that Vikavolt is often priced very low in drafts, it is tempting to take, and the ability to run things like an agility set definitely makes it very scary off of its base 145 special attack set. So these are all really interesting Pokemon. However, they do take pretty specific circumstances for you to draft them, because if you just put it on a team that's not really weak to anything that they need to take care of, you probably won't be bringing them off the bench very often. So it's definitely something to consider when you're thinking about your electric types. And lastly, we gotta talk about the god, which is Stunfisk. There's no electric type in the game that does what Stunfisk does, and what Stunfisk does is everything. It sets rocks, it never dies, it can kill anything it wants. It's just an absolute beast. If you don't know what Stunfisk does, then you should probably go look it up. This thing is just an unbelievable mon, and you can't you really know that you're good once you can start being able to use Stunfisk to a good ability. I didn't word that very well, but basically Stunfisk is a lord, and if you don't know about it, then you should. So that's that. I talked about 6 different categories of electric types, and now it's time to say which I think are the best to draft in a draft of your own. So overall, the most important and the best overall is the best. Tapu Koko, Zapdos, Thundee, Thundee. These are Pokemon that are very good to draft around. They're very worthy round 1 or round 2 picks. They don't have many drawbacks when you're building with them. They're very easy to bring to just about every single game, and they're Pokemon that will always be very reliable to you, and they can do a whole lot of things. Definitely the most reliable out of the group. Obviously, they are the most sought after and the most expensive, so you have to keep that in mind, but they're good Pokemon that you can build around as a core rather than have accentuate the rest of your team, which is what the rest of these do. The second most important, I think, out of this group are the pivots. Pivots are really important if you have more of a bulky offensive team. Pokemon like the Rotom Wash and overall most of the Rotom forms can be very, very useful. These things definitely have a little more of a niche, and you definitely need a bit of a team more tailored to these. Things like Wish Pass are very, very useful for them, but these are very good for team support, and they're really helpful, and they have a lot of versatility, so they're definitely something that are good in most teams. And of course, the third category that you should always think about drafting is Stunfisk, because Stunfisk is the greatest mon of all time. It's priced very cheaply, and it does everything you'd ever want. It never dies, it can never be one-shotted, it gets up rocks 100% of the time, it kills everything in sight. This is an unbeatable mon. Revengers are things that you need only in very, very specific circumstances. If your team is extremely slow and you're weak to things like flying and water, that would be a good time to pick up one of these. If you have an offensive team and you couldn't snag one of the top 4 electric types, that's the time when you consider picking these up. However, if you don't have a team that suits these well, they will not be very effective for you. If you have a bulky team, there's no point to pick up things like a Jolteon, because you're volt switching out and then you're not doing very much damage, and then you're sending out one of your bulky mons that can't really do much. So these are best suited for an offensive team, and even then I don't think they're all that necessary. You have to definitely have a volt turn aspect in mind for your team to be able to draft them, and with the cheap picks that kind of goes along the same lines. If you don't want to spend the big bucks on one of the more expensive volt turn exclusive mons, these are good to add just a little extra aspect to your team. Not something you'll use very often, not something that will be always very effective, but it's something that can pull through in a cinch if you really need a volt switch, or if your opponent is just really weak to electric in general. That's a good mon to bring off the bench, but definitely the least useful out of the bunch. And then miscellaneous, like I said, is for very specific circumstances, and I would not recommend drafting these if you don't have a reason to. So with that all being said, that's my thoughts on the electric types. Let me know what you thought about this. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll try and get out one of these just about every week. So with that all being said, hope you enjoyed. If you did, drop a like, leave a comment, tell me what you thought, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.